Electricity. Wow, I am so glad that I paid attention in junior high and freshman high school electronics to remember kind of basic DC electricity 101. And thank you to my tech ed teachers, Mr. Nix and Mr. Thoreau. If you ever stumble across this video, I do appreciate your knowledge because it is something that I used a whole heck of a lot in this project. My name is Dave Tim from Guns and Tactics, and you are watching the series on my Ultimate Range side-by-side, my Family Fun Mobile, my Ultimate Range Mobile, the Guns and Tactics or GAT Mobile. This is something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and this is my dream side-by-side. Now this video is part of a series on my Ultimate Range UTV or side-by-side project. If you like what you're seeing, make sure you check out the playlist or head on over to gunsandtactics.com once all the videos are uploaded. That article will be a one-stop shop for all of the videos, a little bit more information, and links to all of the stuff used in this video series. I wanted a lot of accessories. I wanted reverse lights. I wanted a rear turn signal type system. So I ended up going with a rear light bar from rearlightbar.com. And that has a third brake light, reverse lights, and turn signals. And I had some extra reverse pods as well for kind of more of a ditch or angled lighting if I was towing or something like that. I wanted cargo lights in case it was dark and I was doing something. I wanted dome lights. I wanted a light bar in case I was riding at night. And then of course I had to wire it all together. Now I decided to use the Switch Pro's RCR Force 12 power controller and switch panel, which is an absolute amazing piece of equipment, and I'll have its own focused review on that product. But I had to wire all this together. Now Switch Pro's was really good, and they recommended soldering everything. They said, you know, just crimping or whatever, you can get water and moisture in there, so we recommend soldering everything. And I did that. I used these little soldering butt connectors that I talked about in the supplies video. They worked really slick. I did solder some accessories early on, but I found that these little heat tube butt connectors with a little ring of solder in there just worked far, far better. And I'll show a little demo of how slick they work, but it's actually an ingenious little tool that works really, really well. Now, as far as the other thing that I'll tell you right up front with the electrical part is have a plan. I cannot tell you how important it is to have a plan. Now, I actually, I used my iPad for all of this, but I had a plan on what all my power outs would be. I had a plan on how the switch programming would be. I had a plan on what the switch layout would look like, which labels I would use, and then I even drew a little schematic of kind of where my accessories would go so I'd know where to run wires. And I'll show you guys all that, my little chicken scratch on my iPad on the screen. Now, why that is important is because the first thing I figured out I had to do was determine what size of wire to use. Now, the size of wire is very important. If you use undersized wire, you could have a fire, you could damage your components, you could have shorts, you could have all sorts of electrical problems. So you need to make sure that you're using the proper wire size, and that's determined by how long the wire is going to be, how far it is from the source of the power to the electric component, as well as the volts and the current needed. And for me, I figured out that most of my accessories would be just fine with 18 gauge or smaller, but I just wanted to be on the safe side, so I bought 16 gauge with the exception of the front LED light bar. I did get a 14 gauge lead for that because that was a higher amp output product. The first thing I wanted to address when I was going to be installing all of these accessories is how was I going to power these accessories. Now, yes, the Honda Pioneer onboard does have a stator and its own battery. However, it is highly recommended to run a dual battery setup. That way, the primary battery can be used for starting and controlling the computer for the clutches and transmission, and the secondary battery can be used for powering the accessories, especially high amperage accessories like the light bars, maybe I add a stereo, all the other lights, and so on. Now, one of the things to realize with this machine is that it's almost like they made it to have a second battery. There's this nice little compartment in the front fender that holds a second battery that can be wired parallel into the current battery. I also did add an isolator, and what that device does is it prevents the main battery from becoming discharged. It's kind of like a one-way limiter. It allows electricity to charge the secondary battery, but it doesn't allow that same electricity to steal power from the main battery. So hopefully that ensures that no matter what, I can always start my side-by-side, even if the second battery goes dead. I also did add a voltage meter so I can monitor the voltage of both the main battery and the auxiliary battery from inside the cab. I wired the Switch Pro directly to the secondary battery, so that way all of my accessories are powered off of that secondary battery. I started by running basically like 8 lines all the way back underneath the machine, and then I loomed that so it would be insulated and protected. And that was a really kind of a pain to follow some of the factory wiring and zip tie it to there. But it was something that needed to be done. Now for me, I wanted to have 2 leads to every accessory. I wanted to have the positive, and then I wanted to have the ground coming back to a centralized ground panel under the hood versus just doing a frame ground or, you know, doing a ground screw to anything metal because I didn't want to have any interference or shorts or back feeds or anything like that. So I wanted to make sure everything came right back to that central location. Now the other thing I did was, in addition to my planning, is I labeled all of my wires. So I bought a label maker and literally I just laid out power source, ground, whatever it might be, and every accessory had a number associated with it based on the power output it would receive. So number 1 was the white LED light bar, 2 was the amber, 5 was left signal, 6 was right, and so on. But everything had a number code and was planned so that way when I had this big spaghetti mess of wires, it all had its little label. So then once I actually started getting my harness kind of organized and together, I knew what was what, and I knew which ground it screwed into, and I knew which power source it had to be soldered to, and I knew everything was organized and neat. Plus, if I ever have to take it apart or do any repairs or anything like that, I know exactly what lead goes to what or what ground does what. Now, Switch Pro also recommended grounding their power supply directly to the battery to avoid interference because the battery acts as a capacitor, so I did that. And whatever power supply you're going to be using or switch controller, or if you're going to be using relays and traditional switches, just make sure you follow the manufacturer's directions. They actually do know what they're talking about. And electricity and electrical components is something not to mess with because it could be costly by damaging your stuff, or it could be incredibly costly if you were to have an electrical fire, which is no fun. As I started to get all the accessories ready to be wired into the Switch Pro, one of the things that I found was really helpful was having a set of test leads and a test light. This way I could quickly run power to something to make sure that was the correct accessory before I labeled it, and then I can also verify power was running back and forth, therefore confirming with that test light. Highly something I would recommend you do as well, because it would not be fun to get everything together and then come to find out it was actually the wrong wire or the wrong lead or something like that. Now, speaking of everything else that I had to do, I did have to fabricate a little bit of brackets, which, you know, it was actually kind of cool. I know I wanted these dome lights, and I found these nice little angled cargo lights on Amazon. I ordered one ahead of time just to kind of test it out, and it was actually super bright. It has a nice flood beam. In some ways for the dome, it's almost too bright, but it works out really well. And then basically what I did was I used some cardboard or some plastic tag board, and I kind of mocked the bracket of how it was going to be. I call it CAD, or cardboard aided design. From that, I traced it over to some sheet metal, bent and fabricated the sheet metal, painted it, used some nutserts in the frame to attach that sheet metal bracket, attached the light, and then ran the wiring either through the roll cage or down the roll cage depending on the location. For the rear light bar, I did something very similar, but I kind of had to improvise a little bit. I made an aluminum bracket, I milled it rough in the milling machine, and then I was able to heat it up and bend it so it was the proper angle. And then again, I used some nutserts in the rear bottom frame, and I was able to attach the bracket and attach the rear light bar to that. Now, one of the things that I'll talk a little bit more about with the RCR Force 12 video is kind of programming, but what was really cool about that is I could basically take either triggers or switch inputs to turn on different outputs. So with my third brake light, I took a lead off of the brake light, the factory brake light, and a harness I got from HondaSideBySide.com. That was trigger number 1, and I programmed the Switch Pro to basically say whenever trigger number 1 is getting power, activate, you know, output number, I can't remember where it is, but, you know, brake light on that. So it worked out really slick. Additionally, you could program it to do different things, like if it detects the tail lights, you could do dimming, which is one of the other triggers I did for the control panel, or you could even have it so that if you turn the brights on, it could turn on a light bar or something like that. But a lot of programming, and again, having that organization really kind of helped me keep everything organized, get everything together, and made the project go that much smoother. I couldn't imagine the mess it would be if I just had all these wires coming everywhere. Now, speaking of wiring, all the extra wires that I did have, because you are going to have some extra length, there's a nice little void on the fender or above the wheel, the front wheel well. So I just decided to use that. I took the fender and hood assembly off to do the color swap anyway, so I knew there was this nice void there, so I stored all of my extra wiring there. And now if I ever want to add an accessory, I just have to pull the right panel, open up a little bit, grab a particular lead. They're all labeled, numbered, and I can wire that to my new accessory, program the Switch Pro to turn on that output, and I'm all set. One of the other really cool lights that I added that I didn't talk about in my overview video because I just, quite frankly, I spaced it, is my rear whips that I also got from Rear Light Bar. Now these whips are really cool, especially because it is the Guns and Tactics mobile, and these are the ballistic whips. Now if you'll notice, the whip base is actually a 50 cal casing shape. It's anodized, so it kind of has that brass look, and then the top tip of it is actually like shaped after a 50 cal bullet, and again anodized, so it has that nice cool brass look. But once I was talking to Dave at rearlightbar.com, who again was super helpful in making my rear light bar customized for me, he said, dude, if you're going to do this Guns and Tactics mobile, you need to get a set of these whips. So he gave me a deal on these whips, and they are awesome. You can program them with the Bluetooth to be any color. I just like green, so it matches all my other lights. But these things are awesome. Super easy. They have a quick release bracket. The wiring was super simple. I basically had my rear body panel, easy access for my power. So when I'm not using the whips, I can simply stow the cord in the little rear storage option. Or when I am going to use the whips, I simply throw them on, attach them with the quick plug for power, and I'm all set. One other upgrade I made because I had the model that came with the halogen lights is I figured, you know what, it's just as good a time as any, especially because I'm going to have the front of the machine tore down, is upgrade to the LED headlights. Now I did get the knockoff versus the Honda lights. However, I'm not necessarily convinced that they're that much different, except for there's a few $100 price difference versus the factory OEM Honda ones versus the eBay knockoffs. Obviously long-term, time will tell. Now, as far as wiring the front turn signals, I used these Phoenix surface mount LED modules. They do come in a traditional lens or a 180-degree flood lens, which is what I went with, thinking it would be more of a turn signal. I wanted that light to disperse. Super simple, 2 holes to attach the light, 1 hole to run the wire, and then you could program the light to do different things. I just programmed it to accept power and steady burn, so when it had power, it burned steady. And then again, I used the Switch Pro to control either the flashing or the strobe function for my hazard lights, and it worked out super easy. Now, if I were to do this again in hindsight, would I buy the dual color? You know, I certainly could. I considered buying the white and amber, and that way I could have like a little bit of a white daytime running light or a driving light versus the amber parking light or driving light. But the reality is I thought if I ever want white light to the front, I'm probably just going to turn the headlights on. So if I needed a daytime running light, I could just use the headlights, and I saved a little bit of money by just getting the single color versus the dual color. If you have any comments or questions about my UTV series in general, you can also hit those up in the comment section or send us an email at theqa@gunsandtactics.com. That'll come to me, whether it's UTV or firearms related questions. If you guys enjoyed the content, I really would appreciate it if you like, share, and subscribe. We are trying to grow, and we need your help to do that. Thank you guys very much for watching, and have a great day. We work really hard to make content that we hope you as a shooter would enjoy. Subscribe to our channel, check out our featured videos and playlists, and if you have a question firearms related, go ahead and send an email to the address shown on the screen to be entered into our monthly QA series.